Welcome our witnesses from the Canada Revenue Agency. We've got Eric Farron, who's the General Criminal Investigations Directorate, Compliance Programs Branch. Anne Marie Lauren is here, Acting Director General and Deputy Chief Privacy Officer.
Okay.
Access to Information and Privacy Directorate, Public Affairs Branch. And from the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, we've got Steve Haroon, who's the Chief Compliance and Enforcement Officer. Anthony McIntyre is here, General Counsel and Deputy Executive Director of Legal Services. We're going to start with the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications Commission. You have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us to appear before your committee. Before I begin my remarks, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. My name is Stephen Haroun. I am the Chief Compliance and Enforcement Officer at the CRTC. Je suis accompagné aujourd'hui par l'avocat général du CRTC, Anthony McIntyre.
I am joined today by the CRTC General Counsel, Anthony McIntyre.
Independent.
The CRTC is an independent quasi-judicial tribunal that operates at arm's length from the government. We hold public hearings on telecommunications and broadcasting matters, and we make decisions based on the public record.
In addition, the CRTC plays a part of a larger federal government effort to protect Canadians from spam, malware, phishing, and other electronic threats. The CRTC is one of 3 agencies, along with the Competition Bureau and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, that work to promote and enforce compliance with Canada's anti-spam legislation, or as we call it, CASL. CRTC has a small team of less than 20 people that carries out this important mandate. CASL authorizes our investigators to request warrants from the courts to examine computers and other electronic devices when necessary. As part of those authorized activities, the CRTC staff can use digital forensic tools during investigations. How we use these tools is very limited in scope and is done in keeping with the law. In the very limited circumstances in which we have used these tools, we have obtained judicial authorization through the courts in the form of a warrant. Since 2022, the CRTC has only used these tools in 2 CASL investigations. In these cases, a warrant was obtained and the CRTC was successful in uncovering evidence related to potential CASL violations. Nous prenons très au sérieux l'utilisation des outils.
We take the use of digital forensics tools very seriously. We follow strict legislative and judicial parameters when using these tools.
Thank you for allowing us time to explain our limited use of these tools to help protect Canadians from harmful electronic threats. We look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Haroon. Well under time, which the committee appreciates. We're going to go to the Canada Revenue Agency now. You have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics for having us here today. My name is Eric Ferron, and I am the Director General of Criminal Investigations at the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA. I am accompanied by my colleague Anne-Marie Lorrain, Acting Director General of the Access to Information and Privacy Directorate and Deputy Chief Privacy Officer. Within the scope of my responsibilities, the Criminal Investigations Program investigates significant cases of tax evasion, tax fraud, and other serious violations of tax laws, and where appropriate, referring cases to the Public Prosecution Services of Canada, the PPSC, for possible criminal prosecution. Ms. Lorrain's responsibilities include providing strategic direction, expert advice, and leadership on all access to information and privacy matters in support of the CRA's programs, services, and priorities. I would like to start by stating that the CRA does not use spyware tools to monitor its employees or Canadians. The Criminal Investigations Program does use the technological tools that are the topic of today's discussion. CRA criminal investigators and computer forensic analysts are public officers as defined by Section 2 of the Criminal Code. As public officers, CRA investigators can obtain evidence during the conduct of a criminal investigation by way of search warrants, preservation orders, and production orders pursuant to Section 47 of the Criminal Code. This is in addition to the search powers provided by the acts administered by the CRA. Warrants issued by the court grant authority to CRA investigators to search and seize personal information or data that could be otherwise protected by Section 8 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In granting a search warrant, the issuing justice or judge must balance the rights of the CRA to gather evidence as part of a criminal investigation with the rights of individuals. Under Section 487 of the Criminal Code, search warrants are sought when there are reasonable grounds to believe that an offense has been or is suspected of having been committed. The evolution of technology has expanded the use of search warrants beyond traditional physical locations. Subsection 47, 2.1 and 2.2 of the Criminal Code speak to search warrants of computers and electronic data, allowing the CRA investigators to search the electronic devices they have seized for data. It is during the execution of these judicial authorizations that the CRA may use technological tools to extract data from electronic devices. A privacy impact assessment for the Criminal Investigations Program has been in place since 2016, and the CRA was in the process of finalizing updates to it in late 2023. The update to the assessment has now been finalized, and in line with best practices, the program intends to continue reviewing its PIA on a regular basis to ensure it is up to date and reflects current operations. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. Ms. Lorrain and I would be pleased to answer any questions committee members may have.
OK, merci, Monsieur Ferrand. On va commencer notre...
We're going to start our first round with Mr. Barrett, who has 6 minutes.
Chair, I'm going to take this opportunity to give a notice of motion that'll be moved at a later meeting. Given that the former president of Sustainable Development Technologies Canada testified before committee last week, claiming that the Minister of Industry knew about conflicts of interest at the taxpayer-backed fund since 2019, contradicting the minister's claim that he found out about this abuse at the fund just this past year, and that senior government officials misled committee about their attendance at SDTC board meetings where conflicts of interest occurred by board members and the CEO by directing taxpayer money to companies that they have an interest in, and that a senior Department of Industry official who oversaw an investigation into the fund compromised the investigation through interference and unethical behavior, that this committee dedicate 5 meetings related to developments at Sustainable Development Technologies Canada. I can send that text to the clerk, Chair, but this is an incredibly important issue, and when I have the opportunity to move it at our next meeting, with notice having been given, I would encourage all members to consider over the next couple of days their support for it, because this is an incredibly important issue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett, for that notice of motion. Once it's sent to the clerk, it'll be put into the digital binder for committee members to have a look at it. Mr. Barrett, you've got 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Go ahead, please.
To Mrs. Kuzi, please.
Madame Kuzi, commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett, and thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to again quote the Privacy Commissioner, who said that it's going to be even more important to reassure Canadians. We need to have that reflex of privacy by design, privacy at the front end. And I must say, I was not quelled by the first group of departments that were here this morning. What I heard was, we did not have the PIAs. Don't worry, we didn't use them on employees, but we use them in far more extensive and invasive surveillance in far more extensive and invasive other places. So I'm very, very concerned by that. And I will say that the committee agreed to communicate with all 137 federal institutions. It's unfortunate that these 4 organizations that are here today, as a model and as a sort of a check as to the other departments, but this is the pressure that is on you this morning. And the last comment I'll make before I get into the questioning is that I find it ironic that the Privacy Commissioner actually learned of the invasion, if I can use that term, by the federal departments and agencies, by actually the governing agency of Radio Canada, who first posted the story. So I think that this is another very ironic piece of information given this meeting this morning. So I'll start with you, Mr. Haroon, with the same question I used on your previous colleague. Did your department procure surveillance gear that can be used to access employees' information and potentially the information of Canadians at large?
No, we do not procure surveillance gear. We have digital forensic tools, which we use to enforce CASL.
Okay, and do these digital forensic tools require the PIA?
They do. Okay,
and was the PIA obtained for these tools prior to their use?
When CASL came into force in 2014, the CRTC conducted three PIAs, as it was a brand new program. One of those PIAs specifically references Section 19, search warrants, and the use of digital forensic tools. So we've had a PIA since 2014.
So you have valid PIAs for all of these tools, which you are currently using?
Correct.
Okay. I'll ask the same question of Monsieur Ferrand. Did your department procure surveillance gear that can be used to access employees' information and potentially the information of Canadians at large?
Criminal investigations has tools that we're discussing here today. They're not surveillance tools. They're digital forensic tools that we use as part of our criminal investigations. And we've had a PIA for the criminal investigations program as a whole since 2016, and the tools that we've had were purchased right before that.
Okay. Have you received any direction from the Treasury Board when it was announced that many departments were not in compliance with the required PIAs, Mr. Ferron?
The discussions with the Privacy Commissioner happened with my colleague here, so I'll let her address that question.
Yes. Excuse me. Thank you for the question. Both the OPC and Treasury Board sent follow-up questions regarding that, and we indicated that we use them for the purposes of criminal investigations, forensic tools for the purposes of investigations, and that we did have a PIA in place. And in fact, the Privacy Commissioner acknowledged receipt of that PIA and had no recommendations on it at the time.
Okay, and I will also ask Mr. Haroon if he received any direction from the Treasury Board when it was announced as to other federal departments not having the required PIAs.
We did not receive a direction from Treasury Board. We advised Treasury Board that we had a PIA as per my previous answer.
Okay. Would both departments be aware if the President of the Treasury Board is made aware of a systematic compliance issue? They're able to make direct recommendations to the head of the government institutions involved? Were there no PIAs?
Very, very quick for both of you. If either yes, no, you can do that.
PIAs are submitted to both Treasury Board and the OPC. So if they have an opportunity to provide feedback to us on those things.
Thank you. Mr. Housefather, for 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I always appreciate my colleague, Ms. Kuzi. I think I was at a different panel than her for the first panel because I didn't hear any of the things that I thought she heard. I think what we came here today was that some people were hoping to hear that these tools were bought since the Liberals took power in 2015.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead on the point of order, Madam
Perhaps
Kuzi.
if the clerk can check the attendance from the first hour, the clerk will recognize that I was here. Perhaps maybe we could just take a moment and verify the.
Looks like we're having a little bit of a battle between MP Kusi and MP Housefather. Who I enjoy how MP Housefather, since he did that Christmas poem, a couple of parliaments ago, and is filibustering in the committee. Remember, it's we all have teams, and sometimes you have to do the thing you don't want. But this looks like it's about to get a little bit heated. We're about a few minutes behind live, so I think we're about to see some tensions building.
Attendance for the first hour.
I don't need her to do that.
Okay.
I know you were here.
Okay,
Go
thank
ahead,
you very much, Mr. Chair.
I didn't say that you weren't here. I said we don't think we were at the same meeting. I didn't say you weren't here. You described what you heard you described the first panel differently than I perceived it.
Mr. Housefather, I've got another point of order from Ms. Kusi. Go ahead.
I believe that the member across from me was implying that I was absent from the room for the first hour, when in fact that was the implication.
That's a matter of debate. I'm gonna go to Mr. Housefather. Go ahead. You've got.
I'm not going to even get into that one.
I stopped your time. Go ahead. You got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there was an attempt to somehow say that these tools were bought when the Liberals were in power, no PIA was obtained, and there was negligence on the part of the Treasury Board. So just to be clear, CRTC, when did you buy the tool? 2014, before the Liberals took power. Et Revenu Canada, est-ce que vous pourriez me dire la même chose?
And for the CRA?
Then, as to a PIA, there was an attempt to say, well, you guys didn't comply, there was no PIA. So CRTC, you do have a PIA for this program. Since 2014. And Revenu Canada, vous aviez un PIA?
And same thing for the CRA, you've had a PIA since 2016?
Sounds like you guys are in compliance, which is good to hear. Now, I guess the other thing that may have been of more general concern was how these tools were being used. Were these tools being used to somehow surreptitiously, spy on Canadians? From what I understand, neither CRTC or Revenu Canada is using spyware or malware or inserting tools on devices to do anything nefarious. Would that be correct, CRTC?
That would be correct.
Et Revenu Canada aussi?
Yeah.
Perfect. And the way I would understand that you use these tools is simply to extract data from a device that you have in your possession. Is that true to the CRTC?
That is correct.
Et Revenu Canada aussi?
Yes, and only once we have a judicial order.
Yeah, I was going to get to that in my next question. CRTC, you also would confirm that you would need and you've always gotten a warrant before you've taken a device?
Every time we've obtained a device and or use this tool, we have a search warrant which specifies the use of these tools.
And the other thing that I would imagine we were also seeking to do was to confirm that you weren't outrageously using these devices by having, outrageous numbers of warrants for Canadians to have to produce things. And I think you said, CRTC, that you've only used this twice since 2013?
Since 2022, we've used it twice. Overall, we've used it a handful of times in 10 years.
So you are not using this on an absolutely regular, ongoing basis?
It is a very limited scope and a very limited type of investigation.
And you're not using it with respect to internal matters at the CRTC where employees are being disciplined for violating internal policies?
It is only used for castle investigations and for a very specific type of castle investigation, and there's limited use of that tool even within my own team. There's only 4 or 5 technical experts who even know how to use it.
Est-ce que je peux demander la même question à Revenu?
And can I ask the same question to Canada Revenue Agency? Yes. For our team, they use the tool only when we have a judicial authority to do so. So once we've received a device, we can use the tool to gain access to the device and extract the information. That is the only reason why we'd use the tool.
Well, as you can see, the Liberals are changing tact, and there's a couple MPs, the Justice Minister, House Father today, and there's a couple others, the name kind of escapes me, that have been, since the Liberals, since they've gotten back, have been basically their backs are against the wall. We're seeing a few MPs, and I don't want to call them backbenchers, but they weren't, a lot of them weren't the ones that were always in, and they're stepping it up. And it's going to make it for more exciting politics to see them actually, not on their heels, on their toes, like House Father is right now. And another thing I want to kind of comment on, these damn chairs, like Canadians, we have a large personal space, and MP, I'm sorry, I'm going to make her say, Khaled, MP Khaled, you can tell she's so close to him. You can't look at someone when they're that close and they're talking to a group. It's like, in Peru, being a Canadian, our privacy is just so much bigger. So you can tell she's looking straight ahead, but listening to him. Anyway, I'm just noting oddities. But what do you think here? Leave your comments to the side. Let's listen to this and not me.
Perfect.
Going through process questions, because I think, again, that was another thing. Does CRTC, I'll start with CRTC, I'll keep going, alternating. Does CRTC generally try to comply with Treasury Board directives? Is Treasury Board, when regulations come from Treasury Board, when there are directives from Treasury Board, is there an effort to comply usually?
I would suggest yes.
And how do you ensure that you are compliant? Like what is the method that you use to review the direct? Like I imagine you have people at CRTC that are the ones that are responsible for ensuring that these directives are being complied with. How does that work?
Absolutely. We have a strong corporate team at the CRTC, which looks at all the directives across government, be it Treasury Board, be it the Privacy Commissioner, be it others. And if it impacts my program and the work that we do, then I am directly involved in ensuring that we meet all those requirements.
Est-ce que je peux demander la même question à Revenu Canada?
Same question to the CRA. How do you ensure that you respect the directives?
We have a privacy management framework in the agency. We have a chief privacy officer as part of that privacy management framework, which the pillar is really privacy by design. We have monitor completion of things like privacy assessments, and in fact, we have key performance indicators that measure that, and quarterly updates are provided to senior management on the completion of privacy assessments.
And on other matters, though, because let's say not only isolated to this issue, but on other issues where you deal with the Treasury Board, there's an ongoing dialogue, as I would understand it, between Revenue Canada and the Treasury Board, correct?
Yeah, and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. Yes, our privacy management framework takes all dimensions of privacy into account, and monitors all portions of that from a policy perspective as well as practices perspective.
And the vast majority of these interactions would occur at the departmental level, right? They wouldn't be with politicians. They wouldn't be Minister Anand entering into your premises to start directing you as to how to apply Treasury Board, rules, right? You're dealing with bureaucrats at the department.
Yeah, so privacy is an obligation of all parts of the agency, and senior management is regularly engaged on those obligations and understands those roles and responsibilities.
Thank you so much. And the CRTC, same thing?
The same thing. The CRTC compliance with all federal government requirements, and even more so to your point about a minister is, we are quasi-judicial independent tribunal, so we've been one step further removed.
Thank you so much. I think my time is probably elapsed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Housefather. Monsieur Villemure pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. You know that a parliamentary committee tries to find a way to reassure Canadians on issues that they find concerning, as is the case here. And I'll start with the CRA. I think people are a little bit afraid of the CRA. We don't talk about them much, and so that's why it's even more important to have trust. It should be spontaneous trust. And I'm wondering, in the article, the CBC Radio-Canada article, it was mentioned that the CRA had not completed a PIA. And you're saying this morning that that was not the case. Can you explain the difference between the two versions of the facts, please? I can try to explain. So that PIA was completed in 2016. It was completed on the program as a whole and not on the tools. And when the question was asked, perhaps we weren't specific enough in our response. And so perhaps that caused confusion. But since 2016, that PIA was completed on the program using the tools. Do you believe that it is necessary that a PIA be completed on the tool? I believe that the PIA needs to be completed on the program, and so that is what we did. And in our PIA, we state that our experts use certain tools when we seize electronic devices so that they can extract information. And so we mention it, and it is part of the assessment. Perhaps it would be interesting to tell your communications team to be very specific. I think that might lead to mistrust if you don't. Especially with the CRA, things move very quickly. So PIA was done in 2016 on the program, not on the tool, and it is used in the circumstances that you mentioned. Perfect, thank you. Mr. Arun, same question for you. People don't really know the CRTC. They might think that you're responsible for airwaves and nothing more, but when journalists asked you a question, you said that there hadn't been a PIA, but you're saying that there was one done in 2014. So what is the truth? Thank you for the question. I think that we're facing the same situation as our colleagues.
I believe it was very specific. Do you have a PIA for this specific tool? Of which the response was no. We do have, as I indicated, a PIA for the program, which is how typically PIAs work. It's for the entire program, where those digital forensics tools are identified, not by name, right? For example, we would never use, if it became a different name, if it became Celebrex or Celebrite 2.0, then that PIA would no longer be valid, right? So it's for the tools overall.
Voyez-vous que le PIA...
Do you believe that a PIA would be necessary for the use of a specific tool, or do you believe that the program covers all of it?
The program PIA covers it all because it is very specific about the use of digital forensic tools and evidence gathering, etc.
Est-ce que vous croyez qu'il existe des moyens moins invasifs?
Do you believe that there might be less invasive means to achieve the same results?
It would be extremely challenging. For example, we use the digital forensic tools to gather information, right? For example, I mean, we all carry computers in our pocket, right? At the end of the day, these are now mini computers. It's not like a laptop computer where you can remove the hard drive and analyze that hard drive and put it back in. The only way into this phone and to know what's in this phone is to literally, through this port, which is how Celebrite works, you connect it to the phone, it makes a digital copy, a forensic, evidentiary valid copy of that phone, and then Celebrate allows you to analyze it and allows us to preserve it for investigation purposes, for federal court purposes, etc.
Merci beaucoup pour votre réponse. Mais dites-moi.
Thank you for your answer. As legislators, what could we do so that the Canadian population isn't concerned by the use of these technologies? Technology is advancing quickly because these concerns aren't good for anyone. So what could you do to decrease the distress from Canadians?
We implement any legislation put forth by parliamentarians. If there are suggestions, be it through the Privacy Commissioner or others, that there should be changes to specific aspects, the CRTC would undergo to meet all those obligations.
Pourriez-vous nous fournir par écrit quelques suggestions?
Could you send us some suggestions in writing?
Absolutely. I'll undertake that.
Merci beaucoup. Même question pour M. Ferron.
Thank you. Same question for Mr. Ferron. Do you have any suggestions? For suggestions, I don't have anything that I could give you right now. We follow the rules as they are written. As I stated, a lot of the rules are in the criminal code, and we are following these rules so that I apologize for interrupting. For people to trust the CRA more, do you have any suggestions that we as legislators could implement in order to help you? I don't have anything at this time that I could give you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Villemure.
Ms. Idlet, you've got 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Koyanami, and welcome. I have very quickly just some questions for Canada Revenue Agency related to the article that was originally published by Radio Canada in November 2023. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. In that article, it had been mentioned that CRA was using tools using these tools to analyze data related to tax offenses. My first question to you is, could you explain in more detail how the use of such tools by your institution can be justified under a federal law, if any?
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair. So the criminal investigations program is responsible to investigate significant cases of tax evasion. That requires us to gather evidence. And our investigators will use the tools that they have at their disposal to be able to gather this evidence. Can include interviews. It can be interviews of suspects, of witnesses, but it can also include the use of judicial authorizations. This can be used for production orders or search warrants. Now, when we do search warrants, we can come across some electronic devices, and these devices will need to be able to extract the data from these computers or cell phones. And it's with these tools that we're talking about here today that we can do so. It allows us to get access to these tools in a very surgical way, not to go through the whole phone by ourselves, but the tools allows us to find what we're looking for, and this will be used as evidence ultimately that we would present to the courts.
If the authority for the use of these tools is not coming from law, where is the source coming from for you to use them?
So the authority we have is in the criminal code. That is what allows us to use the tool, to seize the tool, to seize these electronic devices in order to use the tools to extract the data.
And I have questions for both of you, both agencies, because when you were responding to questions to one of the conservative questions regarding surveillance, both of you responded to say that you don't use them, you don't surveil people, that you don't generally surveil people. But both of you mentioned that you do digital forensic tools, that you use them. Can each of you provide more details about what that actually means?
So for the criminal investigations program at the CRA, The difference being that when we have a judicial authorization that allows us to do a search, and if we come across an electronic device and we seize this device, we would then be able to extract the data from it. So we have to have the tool connected to the electronic device, being a phone or a computer. And so the process is very limited that way. In other words, we can't be surveilling the Canadian population as a whole. These tools are made to be used with the actual phone or the actual computer or the electronic device that we have seized as part of a search.
Yeah, and I'll explain just the provision. There are several provisions under CASL, in the anti-spam legislation that we have. Some of those provisions relate to the CRTC's ability to investigate the installation of software without consent, which includes viruses and malware and botnets and those types of activities, the more nefarious activities, if you will. So when we're involved in an investigation related to those types of activities, we are often required to, seek a search warrant, to go collect devices, use this digital forensic tool to, it comes down to the basics of evidence. We identify the evidence, we analyze the evidence, and we preserve the evidence. And that's how we use this tool in those very limited circumstances on those very specific CASL cases.
Because I'm not very familiar with this file, I don't know if there are any reporting requirements of incidences that you've had to use digital forensic tools. Is there data that's collected annually to show how many times that you've had each of your agencies have had to use them, and do you report them to Parliament?
For the CRTC, we do not have a reporting requirement because our scope and our use is so limited. As I said, it's less than a handful of times in 10 years, so it is very specific.
We don't have any reporting requirements on the use of the tools. We do report various statistical data when it comes to criminal investigations, but not on terms of specific use of that tool.
Thank you, Ms. Idlett. That concludes our first round of questioning. We're going to go to our second round, 5-5, 2.5, 2.5, and we are going to start with Mr. Couric. Go ahead for 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses. And just an observation, it's interesting you talk about the PIA, but in the context of the report that triggered this committee to go about this study, I would encourage the idea of transparency by default to make sure that it is clear, because you're talking about a PIA being done, and certainly an early explanation about that process would have been helpful. And I'm sure that the reporters that did the investigation would have valued that information as well. And just another observation, both of your departments acquired this information or this technology under a previous government and did the PIA. So certainly there seems to be a deep care for a previous president of the Treasury Board's commitment to ensuring that privacy was respected. To the CRA, I'd like to get some numbers if I could. How often is this technology to extract data from cell phones, how often is it used on a yearly basis within your investigative, the CRA in general, but specifically for investigations?
Sorry, I don't have the specific information you're looking for. We don't have specific number of times we've used a tool to extract the data from computers or cell phones we would have seized. It's something we can look into and provide information.
If you could provide that to the committee, I think it'd be helpful, because are we talking about dozens of times, hundreds of times, thousands of times? Like, there's a massive range of what could be possible. So if you could please provide that in writing to the committee that we could make public, that would be appreciated. Can I ask for that information?
Yes, we'll do our best to gather that information.
Okay, and just so that we're clear, we work on deadlines here, so by next Wednesday, if possible?
Do our best. Yep. We've had this tool for several years now. I don't know how far back we can go in terms of to provide fulsome numbers. We'll do our best.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that, Chair. I I'm curious in relation to COVID-related programming. So CERB, for example, I know there was 185 employees that it was reported had inappropriately collected CERB checks. So I'm wondering, was this tool used in the process of determining the fault of those 185 employees?
So the criminal investigations program does not have the mandate to investigate CERB offenses. We do have the mandate to investigate other COVID benefits. And
who has the mandate to investigate CERB?
I believe it would be the CRTC or law enforcement.
Okay, and so continue with your previous.
And so the criminal investigations program, if we are investigating an offense of one of these pieces of legislation, we could use the tool to gather information if we've seized an electronic device during a search. But we would not use the tool to do an internal investigation of the actions of these people within the agency.
Okay, when it comes to over the course of COVID, was there, and I guess this is something that you could provide to the committee as well, if there was an increase in the number of investigations that took place. When it comes to the invocation of the Emergencies Act, was there any instances during the course of the invocation of the Act where this technology was used?
No, not for the CRA.
Not for the CRA, okay. Thank you very much. And has there been an instance where it has ever been used without judicial authorization?
No, you need judicial authorization to do your search, and that's when you would seize an electronic device, and so you have to have judicial authorization.
And in terms of safeguards to protect Canadians' data, I know that there's been a number of, and it makes headlines when, the tax authority gets hacked. But I'm just curious if you can outline what some of the safeguards are to ensure that Canadians' data is protected. It's incredibly intrusive to have a copy of someone's cell phone. Wondering what safeguards are in place to ensure that Canadians' privacy is protected during the course of an investigation.
So when we have a judicial authorization that allows us to do a search and then we seize an electronic device, this would then be stored in a standalone computer in an area where only our computer forensic analysts have access to. It's not connected to the internet. It's not connected to the network of the CRA. These standalone computers are in a secure area that allows for maximum protection.
Okay, and just to wrap up, it's not a question, but just to make sure, the privacy commissioner was here. He said that phone calls are welcome when asking for advice. So I appreciate that there was PIAs done. That's certainly helpful. But make sure that you and your employees and superiors, the privacy commissioner wants to work with you to make sure that the information of Canadians is protected, and certainly transparency by default is an expectation I would hope we all have upon every agency of government. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Mr. Baines, 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our two agencies for joining us today. My first question is to maybe the CRA, and we heard before how you gather evidence, and if the evidence requires, then the steps are taken into getting judicial consent to go in and try to extract information from using these tools. So I just have a couple of questions around how many CRA employees have access, to these forensic tools.
So we have, in criminal investigations, approximately 700 employees. Approximately half of them are part of the investigative groups. But the computer forensic analysts are a very small subgroup of specialized people who can do this type of work. I don't have the exact number, and that's something we can provide to the committee.
Please, but let's say an investigation takes place, only a specific number of investigators would be looking at that, and not everybody would have access to these files?
Exactly. Only the people who are involved in the investigation, it's a need-to-know basis. So it's not even all the investigators that would have access. It's only the people who are involved in the file. And actually, the investigators only get access to the information that is relevant. These CFAs, or computer forensic analysts, will sift through the electronic devices and take out what is relevant for the investigation, and that's what the investigators will look at.
And what's the level of security clearance inside the agency that are authorized to access these tools? What are some measures you've taken inside the agency?
Our criminal investigations, the investigators and the computer forensic analysts have a secret clearance, and the information that we have is stored in special areas that only our computer forensic analysts have access to. On standalone computers. The security on these computers have been assessed to be adequate and to be able to protect the information, and the risks appear to be low.
Okay, and now let's say someone that's not assigned to a case tries to access maybe something, you would be alerted in some manner, that you have those measures in place.
Yes, not me personally, maybe ultimately if there was some wrongdoing, but the criminal investigations has some processes in place to limit who has access, and the outside of the criminal investigations, nobody has access to our files.
Okay, and are these tools used strictly to access the data? I think you've already mentioned specific to the cases you've investigated. What about cloud-based databases or data that's out of scope, that's accidentally accessed?
We're discussing here today actually help us to ensure that we are thorough, but at the same time very precise in what we get out of these computers or these telephones or any electronic devices. It allows us to be more surgical, to seek out only what is relevant to the investigation. When we have our judicial orders, they have terms and references in the actual order that explains what we can get access to, and so those are other, I guess, ways of limiting what we would get our hands on.
Okay, maybe a similar question to maybe CRTC. I think there's you demonstrated how someone would access by entering the phone through through the wire or the USB or what have you to extract. Is there a ability to remotely extract information?
No, this tool does not work remotely. We actually have to connect to the device.
Okay, so you would have to get the warrant, get the approval to obtain the device, and then go in without any remote access, connect to the device, and then extract.
Absolutely. So through our search warrant is identified what we're looking for, how we will obtain that information using these types of digital forensic tools. That search warrant is explained to the individual when we're executing the search warrant, so they are well aware of what's going to happen, and so they willingly, or at least by court order, offer us up that device. Even more importantly, often they're required to give us the password. If we don't have the password to that device, we cannot use this tool.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Baines. Thank you, Mr. Haroun. Monsieur Villemure, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to table a motion. It has been sent to the clerk. It was translated and will be circulated to everyone. That, in accordance with Standing Order 108.3H, the committee undertake a study of misinformation and disinformation and their impact on the work of parliamentarians, that the committee devote the next 3 available meetings to this study, that the committee invite experts in the field of misinformation and disinformation, and that the committee report its observations and recommendations to the House. Thank you very much, Mr. Villemure, for your motion. It is receivable. It has been sent out to all members. And I would like to say to our witnesses to please stay for a moment. We're going to discuss the motion that was tabled by Mr. Villemur. Mr. Villemur, do you have any comments to make on your motion? Many think tanks and the Global Economic Forum shared information, and they had statistics on businesses and governments and their concerns regarding misinformation and disinformation. And we've known for a while that these things exist. However, this year, the level of concern has raised and is similar now to concerns regarding climate change. It is something that can be subtle, but it impacts decision-making in Parliament. And when we have to make decisions that have an impact on our population, on departments and organizations, and with the arrival of generative AI, the concept of truth is at question because it's hard to tell what is real and what is fake. And I think that it is essential that we carry out such a study and that we hear experts in the matter so that we can ascertain that we can better serve Canadians and better detect these issues. Thank you, Mr. Villemur. I was talking with the clerk, and we had not received a notice of motion.
Problem here, so I may have overstepped my boundary there by accepting the motion. Now, if members don't want to discuss the motion, then we'd have to take this as a notice of motion to be discussed perhaps at a later date. So just like Mr. Barrett did before, and I'm very sorry for this, but if we can take this as a verbal notice of motion, and I appreciate your comments, and then perhaps we can discuss it at a future meeting.
C'est sans problème, Monsieur le
Okay,
Président.
merci, Monsieur Villemur.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Villemur, and again, I apologize. You still have the floor, if you'd like, for a minute and a half. Hello again. I'll be very brief, and I'll ask you, Mr. Arun, should the Privacy Act be modernized to reflect our new reality? And it's a question for everyone.
If it is deemed the Privacy Act should be amended for whatever reason, we will comply with those amendments.
D'accord avec mon collègue.
I agree with my colleague. Do you have any suggestions for this review? I don't have any comments today. Thank you very much.
See, Monsieur Villemur.
Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
2.5 minutes, final 2.5 minutes, and then we're going to adjourn the meeting after that. Go ahead, Ms. Idlet.
I'm also going to be asking for responses in written form. So having heard your responses to my previous block colleague, I do invite you to read a report that was made by the Department of Justice, who did consultations on the Privacy Act. So between 2020 and 2022, the Department of Justice had led engagement efforts with Indigenous partners on Privacy Act modernization. This resulted in, among others, the publication of the report on the 2022 engagement with Indigenous partners. As of today, February 2024, a government bill to reform the Privacy Act had not been introduced in the House of Commons. So my two questions to you are, do you think there is an urgent need to reform the Privacy Act? If so, why? The second and final question is, what are the most significant amendments you would like to see made to the Act based on your reading of the report?
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Idlet. Again, based on those questions, and Ms. Idlet, I just want to clarify the questions that you asked to the earlier panel. We want those responses to be public, correct? Just as we do with these ones, okay? So I just needed to clarify that because they're going to go into the digital binder for the committee, but we also want those responses to be made public. So thank you for clarifying that. Okay, that concludes our panel for today. I do have some information for committee that I do want to discuss just briefly. Mr. McIntyre, Mr. Haroun, Madame Lorrain, et Monsieur Ferrand, merci pour votre témoignage aujourd'hui.
All right, so that's the committee. Now we're going to go into another one. Thank you for watching. That was pretty good with these folks, and once again, Brock was on it. Why won't this load? All right. Yeah, so it's I'm going to go to another committee for the next half hour. We could go to the immigration targets. Though I feel it's going to be a touchy subject. Okay, so earlier we have a bunch. It's a very busy day today in Parliament. BlackBerry was there doing the cyber security investigation with CRTC. I think we can go to that. Finance Committee had pretty good earlier also with investigation. They're looking into, let's pull it up so I'm not, statutory review of proceeds of crime and terrorist financing act. So the proceeds of crime and terrorist financing. Yesterday, MP Jolie said they were looking. Indigenous, traditional knowledge and science. It was going on today. I like this one. Not many people wanted to watch that one. I got really low views on it, but I found it really interesting because indigenous knowledge has been basically washed aside because it didn't always follow what was known, and from this 1500 or whatever, the scientific method. They have their own, what I learned, and now correct me if I'm wrong, they have their own scientific method and ways of identifying knowledge that haven't necessarily been recognized. And now, at first I was like, this is just crazy talk. But there's a lot of stuff they knew that we didn't, So what's happening now, and this isn't here, this is around the world. Indigenous knowledge is known that we knew things in the past that we don't now, right? One of the reasons is people have either found that information not pertinent to our lives anymore, like cutting stones. How did they move the stones in all these places around the world? There's new talk that there was a sound that they used, amongst other things, right? So there was technologies or information. So anyway, I'm on a rant. But when they're finding, hey, if we look at it from old knowledge and with a new light, we may discover new things. And to me, this is really exciting because it's kind of like the spiritual world. You know what I mean? It's the Harry Potter world meets the lab coat, which to me is fantastic. And I think we'll have new science in new areas that we didn't expect, which is great. Anyway, there's my blurb on that. Like I said, I found that really interesting. No one else. And what else did we have? Health, patented medicine prices review board, high-frequency rail projects, question of privilege relating to intimidation campaign against certain members. That was in private. And so I think, because the last time we're going to go to C26, the cybersecurity, as we're all computery people. And just cut out after their speeches and right to the question. And as always, MP Brock, where is he? Where's MP Brock? He's at the committee. He's at another committee. He's like, I got to call him like Mr. Committee, and he's good, isn't he not? Not only does he make it interesting, he also, he's getting down to like, he gets down to the
notes, and we'll be taking everything you've said under advisement in our consideration of this bill. Going forward, though, we do have another urgent issue that we're facing in this country, and it is the issue of auto thefts. And in the interests of allowing this committee to continue working on C-26, but also to walk and chew gum at the same time and deal with the urgent issue of auto thefts in this country, I plan to be moving my motion that I put on notice at the last committee meeting to discuss. However, given that there have been some discussions with the other parties present, we have come forward with proposed amendments to this motion so that we can program this committee to work simultaneously on C-26 while also working on the very important issue of auto thefts. We know that in 2022, the latest year that auto theft insurance statistics were made available, that $1.2 billion in auto theft claims were made. We know that over 100,000 vehicles were stolen in Canada last year, and this is a growing issue. It's increased year over year, 50% in the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. It's a cross Canada issue. Alberta is the third highest auto theft issue. This is a very important issue in my riding. And I'm very concerned because we do need education to help people know what tools are available to them to help protect their vehicles from auto theft. But at the same time, if the federal government does not take action to secure our ports and to put these repeat offenders behind bars, I fear that we are going to see an increase in the brazenness of these criminal acts, including violence committed against our citizens, if we don't take action to immediately put a chokehold on this unprecedented flow of Canadians' vehicles out of particularly the port of Montreal. And I understand, Mr. Chair, that my colleague Larry Brock is on the speaking list and will be next on the speaking list. So, Mr. Chair, in the interests of ensuring that this committee can continue with its very important study on C-26, but also continue and accelerate the study that was already agreed upon by this committee on October 23rd, the motion put forward by our colleagues in the Bloc Québécois, Ms. Michaud, I will cede the floor to my colleague, Mr. Brock, so that he can move the appropriate amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Brock. Thank you, Chair. So the amendment now being proposed reads as follows, that all the words after the word committee in the first paragraph.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. We don't have a motion. There's no motion. There's a motion on so you can't move an amendment if there's no motion.
So he should, Mr. Lloyd should read the motion. I moved the motion in my speech just now.
Did you moved the motion?
He did not.
The motion has been circulated to the committee.
He did not.
It was circulated on Wednesday.
You have to.
Can you read the motion
has not been moved.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the original motion as read that the committee report to the House its acknowledgement that convening a national summit of politicians and insiders to discuss auto theft will not prevent such theft. It also recognizes that preventing auto theft falls squarely under the federal responsibility of the Canada Border Services Agency, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Transport Canada, and Public Safety Canada, and recommend to the House that the government A, immediately reverse changes to Bill C-5, which allows car-stealing criminals to be on house arrest instead of serving jail time, B, strengthen criminal code provisions to ensure that repeat car-stealing criminals remain in jail, and C, provide CBSA and our ports with the necessary resources to prevent stolen cars from leaving the country.
Point of order.
That's my motion, Mr.
Yes.
Chair.
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that this is out of order for two reasons. In terms of what the House has already considered, the House considered yesterday a substantially similar motion. And the Parliament, the House of Commons, decided not to proceed with that motion. As you know, this is a very rare occurrence, Mr. Chair, that ultimately, when a bill is defeated, you can't at the next day suggest to the committee that that bill be considered. In this case, it was an opposition motion, and it was defeated. And now Conservatives are proposing substantially the same motion today at committee. Now, this is something that really doesn't have precedence, Mr. Chair, because it's kind of shameless that when Parliament decides something, that members of the committee would try to come back with what is substantially the same consideration. And it is true that if this was 3 or 4 years from now, you could say, well, things have substantially changed since Parliament considered this issue, so we should have more discussion and debate on the issue. In this case, it was yesterday, it was last night, it was 14 hours ago, where Parliament decided that the motion was inadequate. I certainly moved an amendment, as you'll recall, Mr. Chair, on behalf of the NDP, talking about cracking down on organized crime, cracking down on money laundering, restoring the cuts, the crime prevention programs that the Harper government put in place, and Conservatives rejected that. And so the motion that was offered yesterday in the House was profoundly weak and contained a lot of disinformation. That's why Parliament defeated it. We can't come back the next day and consider substantially the same motion. And as you note, Mr. Chair, the intention would be to recommend to the House. The House made the decision yesterday. The intent of the motion today is to recommend to the House the same thing. There is an issue of repetition that is very clearly in all our procedural manuals, something that is clearly prohibited. You can't keep bringing the same issue up in the same form. Secondly, I would suggest, Mr. Chair, because it recommends to the House, this is trying to do indirectly what is prohibited directly. In other words, trying to use a committee to reconsider something that was considered yesterday by the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. We're going to suspend for a couple of minutes, and I can confer with the clerk.
Smaller organizations with less sophisticated teams have an opportunity to learn from the larger organizations to protect themselves in advance of an attack. So what I'm hoping is that by opening up the ability to collaborate, not just with the governments, but broadly, without fear of liability, and we are in fact going to have a positive impact without adding to the labor force requirements.
Merci beaucoup. Et justement, sur la question de la Thank you. And in terms of liability, I'd like to hear from anybody else. My concern is if we eliminate liability, companies who could have a team to ensure that they do the work properly could simply think that they don't have to deal with this, and they may feel that they don't have to respect the C-26. Is that a risk if you completely remove the idea of liability?
Think through effective, what my colleague Francis Bradley has talked about as safe harbor legislation, which is what they call it in the U.S. It's what they have in the U.S. Through the effective drafting of something like what they have in the U.S., we can create that fine balance. And that's what we would always aim to do. You never want to remove all responsibility. Certainly removing personal liability from our CISOs who are in very short supply. And one of the speakers last week mentioned that they're leaving at a rate of 75% right now. So we are at risk. But I think with effective drafting of that legislation, we can create balance so that we are not removing all liability, but we are preventing organizations from liability where they are trying to share information for the help of others.
Thank you, Ms. Normanday. Mr. Julian, please, for 6 minutes.
Much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to our witnesses. You've given us a lot of food for thought. I've got a lot of questions. I hope there is no further disruptions because, quite frankly, my Conservative colleagues haven't asked a single question on C-26 to date, and I think that has to change. This is important legislation. I have 2 questions for all 3 of you. The first off, Ms. Quaid, you mentioned that further delays would lose the faith of our partners. The government introduced this in June 2022. We're now in February 2024. We're seeing delays and disruption from the official opposition in trying to process this legislation. Beyond losing the faith of our partners, what are the other consequences? We've had previous witnesses saying that Canada is basically becoming increasingly a target because we don't have legislation in place. What are the consequences for further delay to all 3 of you? And my second question is, and this is based on your excellent brief, Mr. Bradley, talking about during the regulatory process doing consultation. To what extent has the industry been consulted by the government in the legislation to date? To what extent was their input so that we get this bill right? And I'll start with Mr. Bradley and then to Mr. DeBoer and Madame Quaid.
Thank you very much. Those are two very good questions. On the first question with respect to consequences for delay, and it relates to your second question as well, we've been engaged in discussions about this gap, given that we're a sector that has had mandatory reliability and mandatory critical infrastructure protection standards for a decade and a half. And we have been asking the question, what about those other sectors upon which we rely, the interdependence of the sectors? And some sectors have robust programs. Others, we just don't know, frankly. And so we've been in favor of seeing something broader across different critical infrastructures, those other infrastructures that we depend on. We have a very high level of confidence in the regime that we have because it is mandatory, because it is enforceable. We would like to see something in place, and this has been the conversation that we've been having with the government for a very long time, for other sectors upon which we rely. And so I think C26 does fill that gap. It overlaps, and I did talk about that in my comments. But with respect to consultation, in terms of agencies and departments of the government, we have been talking about this for more than a decade. And so this has been something that we've been consulted on extensively, certainly. But it has been something that has been a gap for quite some time.
Mr. DeBoer?
Yes. So I would echo previous comments. Critical infrastructure is called critical infrastructure because it's essential to our daily lives, the functioning of our economy. So that's critical. But there are other elements to this. If the public believes that government has not acted to protect that critical infrastructure, it's the very trust in our government that could be eroded, and the ability to secure our lives. Affordability is another potential impact. Cyber attacks increase costs. Currently, there are countries in the UK, notably, where insurers will refuse to provide insurance costs to actors who have been attacked by a state-sponsored actor. All those costs are passed on to consumers. So could that also be?
Can I interrupt to ask you, do any of the three of you have figures that you can provide us with in terms of costs or increasing costs because of the lack of action at this point?
I can get back to you on that in terms of certainly increasing insurance premium costs, as well as increasing costs in terms of affordability. So we can get back to the committee, or I can get back to the committee on some of those figures. So there are a tremendous series of consequences that are fundamental to our economy. And you just need to look at, for instance, Ukraine. Their electric grid was shut down. Look at Portsmouth, Florida, where a cyber attack almost poisoned their water system. So you can go to catastrophic ends. In terms of consultation, there has been consultation. Our frustration is that this has moved far too slowly. And it needs to be considered also in conjunction with the critical infrastructure strategy, which has not been updated since 2009. And so what is defined as critical infrastructure needs to be aligned with the critical infrastructure entities outlined in this legislation. And that's all public safety's responsibility.
Ms. Quaid, I'll come back to you because you'll be cut off, unfortunately.
Okay, I'll keep it very short. What are the impacts of this if this legislation doesn't pass? Well, look what happened with Colonial gas pipelines. There is at least one death confirmed to be attributed to that. So what's the impact? Death. Let's be simple. If gas doesn't flow, if phone systems don't work, people will not survive. There are also the additional impacts, as Mr. DeBoer was saying, the insurance premiums. It's increasingly difficult to get insurance. My own cyber insurance has gone up exponentially, which means costs associated. I will have to pass that on to customers. the increased cost of doing business, and businesses will go down. Small, mid-sized businesses cannot afford a cyber attack. The cost of remediation is usually in the millions of dollars. So those costs have to go somewhere. And in terms of collaboration...
Thank you, Mr. Julian, Ms. Quaid. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll have another opportunity. That's round one. We're moving into round two now. Mr. Motz, you're up for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for being here. I know it's been stated, the rush to get this through. We've waited since June of 2022, and it was put on the books, and we're still doing the little dance. I've heard witnesses say so far that we need to ask ourselves what's more important, rushing this bill through even though it's faulty, or trying to at least fix it so that it's workable to get some...
At the existing regime that we had and looked at applying it to other sectors.
But I guess you would agree that whether it's because of this regime or another regime, that mandatory reporting requirements are important, that that information collection is important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Normandet, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I have a question for all of our witnesses, and feel free to respond. There's a sort of balance in this bill between what's in the bill and the regulatory aspect. I know that there are a lot of definitions which will flow from regulations and sanctions and who is targeted, etc. Could you comment on this? We know that this is cyber world is very quickly evolving world. Maybe it would be good to have flexibility in having a lot of regulations, but maybe this could be hard on small business. Are we up to date, or are we keeping up with what's going on? What's the balance between the two? I'd like to hear you on that, please.
Go ahead, John. You want to start?
Sure. I think there still needs to be clarity in terms of, as we mentioned, some of the definition issues, but the equilibrium in terms of, for instance, sanctioning and the fines, et cetera, there needs to be some level of consequence for negligence, for failure to implement certain cybersecurity, a baseline cybersecurity standard. And there also needs to be encouragement for large critical infrastructure entities to ensure that their supply chain is secure. And that means working closely with their small, medium-sized businesses. The other thing I would add is that in the United States, the U.S. government has created a grant program to enable critical infrastructure entities to put in place certain baseline cybersecurity requirements. So that could be another suggestion. But finally, the last thing I would mention in terms of the right equilibrium, this law pushes a prevention-first approach. And we know in medicine, prevention is oftentimes better than the cure. Let's get people to invest up front.
So if I can pick up on what Mr. DeBoer was saying in terms of incentives for those small, medium organizations, if we enable the larger organizations to share openly and truthfully and fully with the small, medium organizations what they're seeing and what they are doing, and support them so that they don't get hit with the same attack, the prevention is better than the cure. That will help. Another approach we could take is to incentivize businesses, not necessarily ones covered by this legislation because that's a separate piece, but their supply chain. If we could incentivize the supply chain to reach a level of cyber maturity through tax incentives, through insurance breaks if they have certifications.
Agreed. Thank you, Ms. Normandet. Last speaker, please, or last questions, Mr. Julian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to congratulate Mr. Motz on asking the first question on C26 for the Conservatives a month into the study. I'd like to go back to you, Ms. Quaid. The issue of consultation, also the question of whether or not we're increasingly a target because of the lack of action and delay around important legislation. My third question is just to come back to your recommendation around expenses for joining, if I got this correctly, the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange. To what extent that would be a cost. You said no cost, but I'm sure there would be. Have you evaluated what that would be, and what are the advantages from that? So 3 questions for 2 minutes.
All right, I'll take the last question first, and that is the reference to joining the CCTX. In fact, I said a Canadian cyber collaboration organization, not necessarily ours, although that would be wonderful. When I said there's no cost to the government for that, because it would be part of the ITB program. So any of the organizations, any of the companies that are working through the IT or are impacted by the ITB program could join a threat sharing association so that they can be more aware of what's going on in the cyber ecosystem, what the attack vectors are likely to be, and remediation and resiliency solutions. So that's the first one. No cost to the government. There is a cost for us, but it's nominal for small businesses, really small. The other question you had earlier, I believe, was on collaboration. On consultation.
The consultation process, yeah.
So there was certainly an opportunity for consultations several years ago, and we did participate in that with our members as well, because we reached out to them, so it became a trickle down. But it would be nice to see something like C26 run in concert with the National Cyber Strategy, which was also, the consultation was several years ago and is now 2 years behind. So I see that coming down the pipeline. And the third question?
The third question was, is it true, as some witnesses have pointed out, that increasingly Canada is a target because we haven't put in place the measures to protect against cybersecurity?
That may be harsh. Canada is increasingly a target because we do pay ransom. So there are organizations, there are countries that they don't attack intentionally because they don't pay ransom. Canada generally does pay ransom, or Canadian organizations.
Thank you, Ms. Quaid, Mr. Julian. That's your time. Thank you so much to the witnesses for being here today on a very important topic.
Chair,
we're going to suspend.
Can I just ask the witnesses if there's anything that's further that came up today from the questions being asked you couldn't get a fulsome answer to? Could you please provide it to the committee for our deliberations and report? Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to suspend for 5 minutes and get ready for